Welcome to the White and Blue Podcast. I'm Doug Goodnow and my co-host is Colleen McGinnis. We are here to tell the interesting stories of Hillsdale College alumni, or more accurately, help them share their own stories. Here's a little bit about today's guest. Justice Beth Deer Walker from the class of 1987 was elected to the Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia in 2016, becoming the first justice elected in a nonpartisan race. She served as Chief Justice both in 2019 and 2023. Learn about her previous career as a lawyer and her current duties serving on the West Virginia highest court. Justice Walker, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to join you on your podcast.
Beth, I am excited to have you here because I've been hearing about you for many years and my involvement with alums, and even before in admissions, your name as your achievements in law came up a lot, and then knowing your mom working on the alumni board. So it is a real joy to have you. Thank you again for being here.
Well, you're welcome.
So let's get started. What first? Have you always been interested in law? Was that what you went to Hillsdale to pursue? And how did that come about?
So it started actually when I was in 7th grade in social studies class, when I was told by a classmate that I seemed to like to argue. Maybe I should be a lawyer. And so for whatever reason in 7th grade social studies, I decided, Mr. Hinton's class, I decided I would become a lawyer. And I always wanted to be a lawyer. Mm-hmm. When I came to Hillsdale, that was my intention. I briefly thought in my senior year about going to graduate school in literature instead. I double majored in English and political science, but eventually stayed true to my 7th grade plan.
Those English majors, they can do anything.
That's exactly right. Liberal arts major.
That's right. So before you got into being a justice, you were involved in labor and employment law. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and why that particular area of law?
Sure. So after I graduated from Hillsdale, I went back to Ohio, which is where I grew up, and went to the Ohio State University for law school and interviewed for jobs, as we do in law school, and found a job with a law firm in West Virginia that I didn't have any connections with the state of West Virginia, but it seemed like a great opportunity. There were women in leadership at that law firm. So when I joined that law firm, I got the opportunity to do several different areas of law. Coming out of law school, you don't really have a major in law school generally. Sometimes there's an LLM graduate program in tax you might hear about, but law school is usually more of a general thing. And sometimes the practice doesn't resemble the classwork in law school. So once I got practicing, I really developed an interest in labor and employment law. And that's what I emphasized during my 20 years at a law firm, and then about 5 years as an in-house lawyer with a hospital system. So I practiced for just about 26 years before I took the bench as a Supreme Court justice.
So what compelled you to serve in this way? It's significant.
Well, thank you. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I went to West Virginia, to pursue my legal career, and have always been very grateful for the opportunities I had. They're a wonderful law firm, the incredible people I met, the incredible opportunity for public service in our small, somewhat impoverished state. It takes a lot of folks to continue to move West Virginia forward. And I first actually ran for Supreme Court in 2008. I was recruited, to be perfectly honest. There were 2 seats on the court open at that time. It was a partisan race at that time, Republicans and Democrats. I was the only Republican running in 2008 against 2 Democrats in the general election, and I lost that election by 0.6%. Wow. Very close,
yeah.
Which was both encouraging and discouraging at the same time, as you can imagine. But I saw the possibility of doing something bigger for our state. And once the legislature changed the election from partisan to nonpartisan, I had always been an advocate for nonpartisan judges. I don't think judges should have party labels, and we can talk about that. But Once they changed it, I ran in the first election as a nonpartisan justice and was fortunate enough to prevail by a good bit more. I actually ran against 4 other candidates and had a margin of victory of almost 20%. So
I'm sure that was quite a learning process, the running part, right? Trying to convince people to vote for you? Well,
as I'm sure you have or will interviewed a lot of Hillsdale alums who have run for office, served in public office. You know, the running for any office, whether it's local, statewide, is a challenge. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that the first office you ever run for is a statewide office, which is what I did. A little challenging. It's even more challenging when you're running as a judge because as a practical matter, there are rules that limit what you can say about how you'll rule on things. In fact, you can't say anything about how you'll rule in a prospective case. So your responsibility is to get your name out, tell people about yourself, who you are, what you stand for, fairness, impartiality, the rule of law. I will tell you candidly that it didn't hurt that folks in West Virginia know Hillsdale College. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a terrible thing that I am a Hillsdale College graduate, particularly in the 2016 election. So you do the best to get voters to know who you are, but it is challenging.
One thing that I have learned in my years is everyone comes at an issue with a bias. We're just human beings. And I saw an interview where you were talking about how your emphasis and your focus is focusing on the rule of law and not an opinion and then working your way back from there. So what is that process for you and how much discipline does that require?
It does. It takes some commitment and practice. It's being in the judicial branch of government is very different than being in the legislative or executive branches where your job is to move public policy forward. Our branch is different, and it's hard for folks sometimes to change their mindsets. It takes practice. I always tell the story. Actually, we actually had a case where it came up this week where years ago we had a case in front of us. We are a 5-member Supreme Court. So we are the court of last resort in West Virginia, the highest court. Even though we have Supreme Court of Appeals in our name, we are the Supreme Court of West Virginia. And we heard a case involving a school closure issue. And I had a very definite personal opinion about it, but really had to dig into the law. I remember spending a weekend trying to find a way, to come up with something that made sense to me in my personal opinion. I realized I had to follow the law, even when I disagreed with it. We just had a case this week, I started to say, where it was a real heart-tugging case, and you have to be able to put that aside. It's very challenging, but when you're committed to the rule of law, when you're committed to being a judge who's not an activist, it's a skill. It takes a little practice, but it's definitely achievable.
Very admirable.
Thank you.
Awesome.
You were a lawyer for over 25 years. Then all of a sudden you're a judge, making that transition. What was the biggest surprise from going to lawyer to judge, especially at the highest court in the state?
2 things, really. One, we were just actually talking to new judges last week, and we talked about this. You really change, for good or for ill, it changes your social life a little bit, because in a place like Hillsdale or a place like West Virginia where folks know one another, if folks have cases in front of us, I should probably not be hanging out with them in a restaurant, even if they are friends of mine for a long time. I want folks to absolutely have confidence that the decisions I make aren't because I know people. So the first part is your social life changes a little bit. You have to be very cognizant of that. But the other big surprise really was the second half of our job. I knew our job would be deciding cases, right? Writing opinions. But the other part of our job is we are essentially the board of directors for the judicial branch in West Virginia. We are a unified court system. Not every state is unified. Michigan is not a unified court system entirely. And so we oversee the operations of all the courts in our state, roughly 1,500 employees. And so we do a lot of administrative work. And particularly in the 2 years I've been Chief Justice, there's a lot of day-to-day. We have an administrative office, of course, professionals whose job it is to operate the day-to-day of the court system, but we still oversee that. And so I didn't really, even as a lawyer, understand the depth of that, the day-to-day issues, personnel issues, building issues, space issues, all of that.
I wouldn't have thought that either.
Right.
I would have thought you had a sole function. So that's interesting.
Definitely a surprise.
It's actually made it an even more fun job for me because I do enjoy that leadership aspect to it. You know, we have the responsibility, West Virginians, to run a court system that's accessible to them, that's fair to them, you know, that folks can find out what's going on and understand what's going on in our courts. So it's rewarding.
So for a layman like me and maybe some of our listeners, does it differ much, the state Supreme Court and what you do there versus the U.S. Supreme Court? Like, what is the key differences between the two and what your roles are? Is it all decisions like they're working on, or what's the scope and difference?
So there's several differences. Of course, the Supreme Court of the United States, lifetime appointment, Senate confirmation, you know, the whole process of becoming that judge, as well as any judge in the federal courts, is entirely different. The really differentiating thing, of course, in each state that has a highest court, most of them are called Supreme Courts, you know, we, of course, are bound to follow the United States Constitution, but we also have a state constitution. And every state constitution is a little bit different. And sometimes state constitutions provide more protections in some areas than the federal. Sometimes the federal is more protective. So the biggest difference is we have one difference besides the appointment difference, lifetime. The law that we're applying is different. The Supreme Court of the United States also, as you know, you've heard of folks filing for a writ of certiorari, you know, which is how you get into the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court gets tens of thousands of writs every year and only hears a few cases. In contrast, in West Virginia, we issue an opinion in every single appeal that is filed. Some we do not hear oral arguments on, and some we do. But our state is a non-discretionary court. Some state Supreme Courts are discretionary. So, you know, a way to describe it is the Supreme Court of the United States, discretionary court. Our court is, you have an automatic right of appeal. A couple of differences.
That's great.
But here's a fun fact that ties West Virginia and the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court of the United States was designed by an architect named Cass Gilbert. It's a very distinctive looking courtroom if you've ever been there, and I'm sure some of your listeners have. Cass Gilbert actually designed our Supreme Court just before designing the Supreme Court of the United States. Cass Gilbert was the architect of the West Virginia Capitol, and for anyone who drives through Charleston, West Virginia on the interstate and sees that golden dome right along the river, that's our Capitol building where our Supreme Court is located, and we have a beautiful courtroom reminiscent of what the Supreme Court of the United States looks like. In fact, when I was sworn in West Virginia, I thought, what does this look like? It looks like the Supreme Court of the United States. So it's kind of a fun tie that we have.
Are you able to talk about maybe one of the most impactful or difficult decisions that you've had to work on, or I don't know how you would describe that, but cases that you've heard?
I mentioned, you know, one earlier where I really had a personal, I don't know if you want to say bias, I guess you could say bias, or a personal opinion. I think anytime, you know, as a lawyer, as someone who practiced law in West Virginia for 25 years, I did a lot of work with a lot of people, and I put aside, you know, the personalities of the lawyers involved or who the judge was and all of that. And I think that's a challenge. The heart-wrenching ones that we hear, though, and it's a category instead of a particular case, if you don't mind, is we hear, unfortunately, we had the opioid epidemic in Appalachia, which in West Virginia is entirely in the Appalachian region. And we still have a fairly significant drug abuse problem, drug use, substance use disorder problem. And so we hear a lot of cases involving child abuse and neglect, and they're heartbreaking. Most involve some kind of substance use disorder. So, we've had a lot of challenges in our southern part of our state with the coal industry having been decimated, one could say, by prior administrations. And so, folks are still a little bit challenged by that. Those are hard cases because you have to make sure that the rights of the parents, as terrible as their conduct may be alleged to be, that their rights are protected. And, of course, that the children are protected. Mm-hmm. And when you've got foster parents and, birth parents vying for children, or the heartbreaking situations where a parent is still trying to get into recovery, those are hard cases. Mm-hmm. So it's a category that's hard, but it's super important.
Mm-hmm. Good for you.
Thank you.
Well, I think at this point we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with the White and Blue podcast. Now it's time for the Hillsdale History Minute, where we bring a slice of Hillsdale College history to the White and Blue podcast. Did you know that famous American composer, pianist, and band leader of jazz orchestras Duke Ellington played a concert for 400 couples in Hillsdale at the college J-Hop event on Friday, April 1st, 1949? It was in the old field house. He is also one of several famous musicians to perform at the college. Others included Chubby Checker and the J. Giles Band. Although they technically did not perform on campus, John Denver opened for Neil Diamond at nearby Bailey Elementary School in front of many college students.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome back to the White and Blue podcast, where today we're talking with Justice Beth Deer Walker from the class of 1987, who's a member of the West Virginia Court of Appeals, Supreme Court of Appeals. My apologies.
No apology necessary. It's
okay.
A lot of words.
Since you're back at Hillsdale, I can call you Beth. So I see you have your own podcast. You're more of a veteran podcaster than Colleen and I, so we wanted to ask about that. You have your own podcast called Lady Justice, Women of the Court. Tell us how that got started and what you are hoping to accomplish with your podcast.
So we got started actually during the pandemic. There were four of us who were at the time, some of us aren't anymore, state Supreme Court justices from Texas, Michigan, West Virginia, and Arkansas. And we did a little Zoom interview at the request of the Arkansas Department of Education, who was looking for content during the pandemic for students who were obviously remote learning. And we had so much fun doing that, talking about what we do on state courts, that we decided to try a podcast. So our goal on Lady Justice, Women of the Court is to highlight the work of state courts. Over 90% of the cases in this country, court cases, are heard in state courts. Sometimes people don't realize that we are different than federal courts. We love the federal courts, but we're different. And so we like to do civics education. We like to talk about what courts do, the interesting work we do, drug courts, all kinds of, what the process is at a state Supreme Court. We also like to highlight women in leadership because obviously we're all women on our state's highest courts. We think it's important for women to see, especially students, younger folks, lawyers, to see examples of women stepping forward into leadership. So that's another important part of our podcast. This year, we're in our 5th season. We just dropped we always drop our first episode of the season on Constitution Day.
Very appropriate.
And we are currently partnering with the National Center for State Courts, and they are helping us a little bit with some of the backroom part of a podcast, which you all know well. I don't know if I have any tips, although I do love hearing about, how you've decided to get started at a reasonable pace. I think sometimes people start podcasting at one a week and realize that's a tremendous amount of work. So it sounds like you are getting started very intelligently. Plus, you have a beautiful studio that we're recording in, which is fantastic.
We are very blessed. And Doug mentioned the word veteran earlier to describe he and I as podcasters. And with this being maybe our 8th recording, I would say that's a stretch. But we have advanced a lot. And we have a great coach in Shad, who is also a Hillsdale grad behind that window. And he advised us. I wanted to do multiple a month, and he advised us to keep it scaled down. So we have good coaches, good coaching.
Yeah, Shad is our guardrail, so make sure we're not going off the.
It is really good to have someone whose advice you can listen to.
Yeah, I love podcasts, though. I think they're really fun. All right, so you mentioned women in leadership, and you have served on the alumni board here. You have a family legacy of leadership and women in leadership here at the college. What would be some key points of advice to other women who are balancing family, community, work, career as leaders?
That is a fantastic question, and I hear it a lot in different forms because it is a challenge. I get personally frustrated. We don't have, even though 50% of law school classes in most schools, or more than 50%, are women, when you look at leadership in terms of judges, senior leaders in law firms, it's still predominantly men. Even, and this is true nationally, in-state licensed lawyers in West Virginia, only 30% are women. And I don't know how that happens, but I think part of it is because of the challenges that you mentioned. Folks, culturally, the child caretaking falls on women usually, not always. And so folks, find it challenging. What I always advise particularly younger women to do is see your career as phases. There might be phases of your career when you aren't as active, but that doesn't mean you give up. That means you might just set things on simmer for a little while and get back to, something that you might want to do later. I try to advise women not to give up entirely on their career, even if they do set it aside for a short time, whether it's to care, frankly, for children or parents. Or a spouse. I mean, there's all kinds of personal reasons that can come up, but that doesn't mean sometimes then women are rather reticent about, they're reticent, I think, and this may be a unpopular statement, but I think women are slightly more reticent about asking for time off, asking for breaks, and, being upfront about coming, when you're ready to come back, and doubting yourself. Am I still good? And all of that. And, I just try to get women to think about their career. It's a long career. You don't have to do everything in your first 10 years in whatever career you're in, whether it's journalism.
It's a great reminder.
And, not to be Taylor Swift for a moment, but, you can have different eras.
I like that. Different eras of women in leadership.
Speaking of different eras, both your parents were Hillsdale graduates. And in fact, your mom this morning happened to text me a baby photo of you sitting in a chair with a Hillsdale College onesie or something like that on.
Yep.
So is there any doubt that you were going to Hillsdale when you were a kid? What was that process? Because for some of us, we learned about Hillsdale maybe as a senior in high school, but I would imagine Hillsdale was pretty much all the way through your childhood up until the college decision.
It was very much a part of my growing up, whether it was hearing about mom and dad. Mom and dad did not miss a homecoming, or maybe one homecoming in, 20 or 30 years. From the time they graduated and got married, they were married in 1960. My dad graduated in 58, my mom in 1960. And so we heard about Hillsdale, and we heard about the homecomings, and we heard about the Chubby Checker homecoming, and all of that. And then we would have folks stay at the house. The admissions folks who were coming through town. That's how I met Gregor Hasted. That's how I met a number. Dave Snell, I met that way. Other folks who have worked at the college over the years, and as a result of all that. Oddly enough, I was bound and determined not to come to Hillsdale because I thought, no way, I'm going someplace different. But
where did you fall in your family? Like, what?
I'm the oldest.
Okay,
and so yes, there was the sweatshirt picture. There's also a picture of me at the Hillsdale sign when I'm pretty young with my brother and sister who are 2 years younger than I am, and. But when I came by myself, not with my parents, and spent a weekend. As a, I guess, senior in high school, it was a scholarship weekend. I don't know if they still do that. Invited to spend time and interview for consideration for scholarships. And I was lucky enough to receive a partial tuition scholarship to come. And when I met the college on its own terms and not as my parents' college, it was very attractive to me. I was looking at bigger schools. I thought I wanted a bigger school, and I fell in love with Hillsdale for the first time as a senior in high school, even though I knew about it my whole pretty much existence.
What would you say was foundationally most helpful for your career in terms of what you learned at Hillsdale?
Wow. Well, hands down, the liberal arts education, is frankly invaluable in the law. And what I do now, I read, and I write on the judicial side, the judging side of my current job. And as a lawyer, the writing skills I developed here, the analytical skills, the ability to debate both sides of an issue, all of that, I was in perfect stead when I went to law school. It's always a bit of a culture shock when you go from undergrad to law school, but I was very well prepared here and so grateful for all of the professors and just the excellent preparation. Not a lot of my peers had to write a thesis as an English major. It was had to do the oral comp exam. I don't think I knew anyone who was a peer.
Doug remembers it.
I went through that, and I wake up at middle of the night with Dr. King looking at me.
Absolutely.
But you felt very accomplished once you got through that.
Well, and it was such great preparation. And, we had the opportunity, as the students do now, to interact with speakers who come to campus and, alums who come to campus and all of that. And I think it's just, it's a unique opportunity. Hillsdale is still small enough that you have that wonderful relationship with faculty and mentorship. So all of that. I know I sound like I'm a Hillsdale commercial.
Well,
but
I like it.
We'll take it.
I'm immensely grateful for my Hillsdale College education.
Wonderful. Well, as the alumni director, I'm grateful that you have stayed so involved and supportive. So it means a lot to us. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So we're here today in part because the Chi Omega sorority has its 100th anniversary, and your mom is front and center and all that. So talk to me about that Chi O connection you have with your mom and, basically another legacy that you share with her.
I am thrilled to be here. We've been coming to homecoming with Mom for a couple of years now. She loves coming back. We lost my dad quite a few years ago now. And, Mom at her age is still very enthusiastic and has been anxiously awaiting this 100th anniversary of the establishment of the Rho Gamma chapter of Chi Omega here at Hillsdale College. And, is the co-chair of the event along with one of the younger alums. And, she's so excited. And it's been such a nice tie. I was Chi Omega here on campus. My sister was a Chi Omega where she went to school. She went to Kent State University in Ohio. So we're thrilled to be here with her and to support her in, her relationships in the Chi Omega sorority, whether it had been here on Hillsdale campus. She's been involved in the House Corporation. She's been involved in alumni organizations in Ohio. She was a regional alumni director with Chi Omega fraternity for a while. So it has been a major part of her leadership in her way throughout her life. So I am happy to be here to support her. And although I'm not sure I had a choice, but I'm more than happy to be here. You both know my mother. She is a force in a very good way.
She's one of our most dedicated volunteers, I would say, for sure.
One of our faves.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about your family and life in West Virginia.
Well, as I said, I've been in West Virginia since 1990, so almost going on 35 years. My husband, Mike, and I have been married for almost 20 years. And
Congrats.
Thank you very much. He is a native West Virginian, so I almost am legitimately a West Virginian, although my 4 colleagues on the court still give me a hard time. When we speak to students and they ask where everybody's from, they always point at me and say, well, she's not from here. And I say, at what point can you be from here? I mean, I've been here for a very long time, but all kidding aside, it's a wonderful place. I had the opportunity. I have a stepdaughter, Jennifer, who's actually now a lawyer in Houston, Texas, practicing law there. So that's my family. I also have a wonderful family of friends and contemporaries in West Virginia. I've been involved in leadership in a variety of capacities. Leadership West Virginia is a program I'm passionate about. I'm a lifelong Girl Scout. And so I was happy to chair the Black Girl Scouts of Black Diamond Council in West Virginia for a long time. I think, and again, going back to Hillsdale, that is a kind of value that's instilled here. You don't keep your talent to yourself. You share it in, we have a responsibility to step forward in our community, whatever your skill is, to do a little something to make the world a better place. And that's what I have tried to do.
Great.
Well, I do have one more question. And I ask this, I don't know that many judges, but the ones that I do run across, I ask, so what do you think about all these TV shows with all these judges on TV? What's your take on it? Because it seems like they're everywhere now.
Well, this is the Judge Judy question, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
like a fictional show or the reality shows?
Well,
all of them?
Sort of.
As well.
More the entertainment ones.
Okay.
I mean, the Judge Judy's and all of that, I mean, it doesn't bear any resemblance to what we actually do. We actually...
I'm shocked.
We took our court on the road. We do this 3 or 4 times a year to a high school in central West Virginia this week. And we actually heard cases in the high school auditorium. And we took questions and answers from the students afterwards. And they always want to know something that's kind of law and order related or something. And we try to explain, what we do is not nearly as exciting. It's not dramatized for television, but, it's entertainment. I guess ours is not entertainment. Real people are, and that's the only unfortunate thing about those shows is, the folks who come in front of us want, they have a serious dispute, whether it's a civil case where people are fighting over an injury or a property dispute, or a constitutional case where you're talking about someone's rights, or a criminal case where someone's been accused of or convicted of a felony. Those are real people. And I don't want to be too light about it because I want those folks to know that we are taking their cases seriously, even if the facts may be a little humorous. We try to give folks confidence. So it's a. I guess what I'm saying is we try to draw a line between. We want folks to know what we do, and it's understandable. We started, for example, we opened a learning center at the West Virginia Supreme Court. It was a pet project of mine last year as chief, where now students can come and learn about our court system on big screens right outside our courtroom. We're on the Capitol tour. If anyone is driving through Charleston, West Virginia, you can come see our court. Feel free to stop by. It's open all the time during business hours. It's a beautiful room, and if they do come, they can find my email on our West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals website. Any Hillsdale grads that are coming through, let me know. I'd love to give you a tour.
Fantastic.
Great.
Thank you for being here. We've loved having you.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited about homecoming weekend. I know it's an incredibly busy weekend for both of you, and for you to take time to have a little conversation amidst all of your duties is really fun.
Thanks. It's a joy.
It was our honor, your honor.
You were waiting to say that, weren't you?
I was.
Well done.
For Doug Goodnow, this is Colleen McGinnis, thanking you for joining us on the White and Blue Podcast, and may that spirit long remain.